After America is made on the lands of the Kure Wurrung, Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, we pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Emma Shortis, and this is After America. President Trump is on tour this week. He stopped off in Malaysia to claim credit for a peace agreement between Thailand and Cambodia.
This is a momentous day for all of the people of Southeast Asia. But the 8 wars that my administration has ended in just 8 months, there's never been anything like that. Never. There never will be either. I can't think of any president that ever solved one war. I don't think anybody. They start wars, they don't solve them.
And then set off to Japan and South Korea, where he'll meet Chinese President Xi Jinping. Trump leaves behind him a government in shutdown. To get around the freeze in federal funds, one of Trump's billionaire mates is paying military salaries. His other billionaire mates are financing his destruction of the East Wing of the White House so that he can build himself a ballroom. While he's gone, members of his cabinet are busy escalating unilateral and illegal attacks against Venezuela.
The media is used to hearing that when it pertains to Afghanistan and Iraq and ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But if you reframe how you understand the world in our own hemisphere, that's exactly what these foreign terrorist organizations are. And so we will track them, we will map them, we will network them, and we will hunt them and kill them because they're trying to and they are killing and poisoning the American people.
The death toll from these strikes, as far as we know, now sits at 43 people. The administration has sent in an aircraft carrier and is threatening land strikes. To explain what exactly the President of Peace is doing at home, in Venezuela, in Gaza and in Ukraine, we're pleased to welcome back friend of the show, Matt Duss. Matt is the Executive Vice President of the Centre for International Policy, a think tank based in Washington, DC. From 2017 to 2022, he was Foreign Policy Advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders. Matt, welcome back to After America.
Always glad to be here. Hello, Emma.
Hello. I kind of hesitate to ask because I've seen you a lot on my screen recently, but how are you?
I'm hanging in there. Fall is here. It's a beautiful season here in Washington, D.C., which summer is not, in my view. So I'll just say that I'm enjoying the new cooling weather, the changing leaves. I'm taking pleasure in those perhaps smaller things. But yeah, no, the situation here politically, which we are going to talk about, remains grim. Some of your listeners may have seen the pictures or the video of the destruction of the East Wing of the White House.
Yeah, I actually wanted to start with that because it's wild. Trump
was like, you know what we need is a metaphor. We really need a metaphor. And, I'm not getting too emotional about it. The White House has been changed in the past. Things change. I don't think we should. Of course, the way he's doing it is completely, Congress, it needs to allocate funds for this kind of thing. He's just gone ahead and do it. My take on it is that I really want future administrations, particularly Democrats, to take a page from this, to note that you can just do things, if you just go for it. So that is how I'm seeing the metaphor. Be willing to take bold, creative steps to tear things down that need to be changed and create new things. I don't think that should be a multi-million-dollar donor-funded ballroom that will apparently be entirely gold. So, but just apply this to other things.
Yeah, you can get stuff done in America.
So that's my take. Yeah,
that's a nice positive spin, Matt, on as you say, some pretty unsubtle symbolism. My gauge is that I actually got asked to go on Australian commercial TV to talk about it, so I know it's really cutting through, and it is. I mean, people are reacting emotionally to it, understandably, and it does seem to be feeding into this clear evidence that Trump is actually deeply unpopular. There have been big protests over last weekend, those No Kings protests. What do you make of the what seems to be, at least from outside, this growing opposition to Trump, and what's your sense of what's driving it?
Yeah, well, I think people, first you have like a core of kind of left-leaning, liberal, centrist, whatever, Democrats who obviously are see this as a moment of real emergency, the steps Trump is taking. And again, the destruction of the East Wing of the White House being a metaphor for that, but taking a whole range of other steps that they see as undemocratic, as clearly authoritarian. You have, troops in the streets of American cities rounding up our neighbors, with no warrants, with very little evidence, if any evidence. Even American citizens who are accidentally detained will sit in detention for days without having access to any legal counsel or a phone call. And even among Trump's base, I mean, he really does have a hardcore base that see him as their king and emperor, and they're willing to go wherever he leads. But I think, yes, he is an historically unpopular president. It's important to note. I mean, he of course won the popular vote along with the Electoral College in November, but not by much. So while I do think it's important to note, as many really didn't in 2016, that this is not an anomaly. This is an enduring phenomenon in our politics. We cannot dismiss it. We should not overinterpret his mandate. And I do think that the showing this past weekend, which I was very happy to go to, along with my daughter, saw some friends on the streets of D.C. One of the biggest national demonstrations in American history, if not the biggest. But I think it did show, and that there's a lot of willingness to resist. I think the question is, okay, what do we do next? What do we do with that energy? Because of course the Democratic Party has yet to really unite around any kind of formula or agenda. I mean, different people have different ideas. Some of them are very good. Some of them, in my view, are less good. But there's kind of no consensus in the Democratic Party yet about what the kind of theory of the case is for the midterms, and then eventually for the 2028 presidential election.
And I mean, as you were saying earlier as well, Trump moved so quickly that it's difficult to keep up and to keep that opposition coherent when he's, breaking so many things at once. And there's also, of course, you've got to factor in the Trump administration's response to those protests, which, is to dehumanize and to other, entire swathes of the American population.
The Insurrection Act, under what conditions or terms would you invoke?
Well, I'd do it if it was necessary. So far it hasn't been necessary, but we have an Insurrection Act for a reason.
President Trump is elected on a mandate to turn that invasion back, to send those illegals home. And Governor Pritzker is providing aid and comfort to the riotous mob that is physically assaulting, obstructing, impeding, and attacking ICE officers. And his latest act, declaring that there are no-go zones where federal law enforcement is not permitted, is truly an act of insurrection against the federal government.
The problem here is not the Insurrection Act or whether we actually invoke it or not. The problem is the fact that the entire media in this country, cheered on by a few far-left lunatics, have made it okay to tee off on American law enforcement.
And they're also, and have been for a while, invoking the Insurrection Act. Trump has mused about it. Stephen Miller is particularly enthusiastic about it. Do you think they will do that? And what would that mean?
I'm actually surprised they have taken this long.
Yeah.
I was part of a number of scenario exercises leading up to the 2028 election, where a number of people got together to talk through different scenarios, after when a new Trump presidency began. And I was a part of, I think, 3 or 4 of these, and every single one of them, at some point, Trump invoked the Insurrection Act because, it's there's nothing anyone can do about it. It's a power the president has, and he alone has the decision-making whether or not to invoke it, to use the military on U.S. streets in a condition of emergency. I think, part of what he's been doing with ICE using National Guard in U.S. cities has been a way to kind of test the boundaries and see what the response would be like, in part also to normalize the idea of U.S. troops in U.S. cities. But I do think they have gotten a lot of pushback. Now, it's hard to say how Trump interprets that. Surely Stephen Miller wanted to do this on the day after inauguration.
Yeah.
But I do think Trump and some other advisors around him perhaps have a bit more of a pragmatic, if I can even use the word pragmatic for Donald Trump. But there is a sense of what's politically possible, even though he constantly shows a willingness and an ability to break through what people previously thought was possible and create a new reality. You have to give him that. But again, the pushback, both the legal pushback in the courts but also physically people. And there are so many amazing videos about this of people in neighborhoods, whether in New York and Chicago and LA and elsewhere, not violently, but just, showing up and coming down the street and gathering, massing to yell at ICE officers who are trying to, take people away. And in many cases, chasing the ICE officers away. They wear these masks, they jump back in their big SUVs, and then they drive off. And again, don't want to overinterpret that either, but that is really important because it does show that Americans will not go down quietly to this kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the scary part for me is the way that Miller and co are responding to that, though, because at the same time that is happening, they are using a kind of blood and soil recruitment drive for ICE and simultaneously reshaping the US military in their image, having Hegseth and Trump standing there saying, do whatever the hell you want.
Should our enemies choose foolishly to challenge us, they will be crushed by the violence, precision, and ferocity of the War Department. In other words, to our enemies, F-A-F-O.
And then I told Pete, we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
To all ICE officers, you have federal immunity in the conduct of your duties. And anybody who lays a hand on you or tries to stop you or tries to obstruct you is committing a felony. You have immunity to perform your duties, and no one, no city official, no state official, no illegal alien, no leftist agitator or domestic insurrectionist can prevent you from fulfilling your legal obligations and duties.
What do you make of how they're reshaping those agencies?
Well, I mean, they're both troubling in their own ways. I mean, I think the military, I mean, that kind of weird TED talk that Hegseth gave a few weeks ago, followed by Trump's usual rambling. I think the reaction to that was overwhelmingly negative. Again, I read the sources I read. I'm, I'm on the channels I'm on. So my own experience is probably not the best, but I do think you've seen a lot of reports from, generals, first of all, who didn't appreciate being summoned from doing their actual work to have to go and sit there and listen to this, this guy who, clearly an unimpressive person in his own right, talking about how the military needs to have higher standards. You can imagine how that landed in a room full of people who have made this their entire lives. So again, he's the Secretary of Defense. I mean, obviously he has a lot of power, and what he said there, I think was, to call it troubling, I think is to really, is too much of an understatement. Just the idea, we're not going to be bound by these absurd rules of engagement where you can't just massacre people. But I do think professional soldiers, though America certainly has, been implicated and clearly carried out these massive violations over the, 20 years of the war on terror and previously. But there is, I think, a sense in the American military that these rules are there for a reason. Even if they are often broken by the U.S. military and other militaries, and to simply cast them aside is unwise for a whole bunch of reasons, but, for a strategic reason. Now, in terms of ICE's recruitment, it is, they just lowering the standards, and again, I'm not here to mock anyone's appearance, but you look at these guys and you're like, all an immigrant really needs to do is run up a flight of stairs. And so just stay near some stairs. These guys, and they're I don't know how many push-ups they need or push-ups they need.
It's 15.
It's 15 push-ups. And, and I looked at it and I was like, wow, okay, well, I don't know. I mean, I could probably do, but, and it's, however, 25 sit-ups, and you got to be, I don't know, able to, eat an ice cream cone in 10 licks. I don't know. It's just, it's so absurd. But you're also going to attract a certain, they want to attract a certain type of person. And I'm sorry, to say that as someone who is just, wow, the standards are so low. I would love the chance to bully people. I would love the chance to exercise power like this. And that's not really coming from a good place, those kinds of impulses. So I think it's clear that ICE is selecting for a specific type of person who should absolutely not be in this position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's clearly their aim. You mentioned there, Matt, though, that, the discarding of rules that have governed military engagement for a long time, unevenly, of course, but, they've been there and they've been there for a reason. Those rules are actively being discarded by the Trump administration off the coast of Latin America. And I think some of our audience especially could be totally forgiven for not quite clocking what is happening there, especially around Venezuela. Could you take us through what's going on?
Yeah, so there's been, I don't know, I'm sorry I lost track, I shouldn't, but there have been more than, I think, half a dozen strikes on, alleged drug boats, mainly in the Caribbean, but as of just a few days ago, now in the Eastern Pacific. And the claim that the Trump administration is making is that these are drug smugglers, and Secretary of Defense Hegseth will go out there and make these claims. We put 6 drug smugglers at the bottom of the sea, but they've offered zero evidence. I think they offered classified briefings to members of Congress for the first 1 or 2 strikes, and now they just don't bother because they just don't. There's nothing in it for them because they have really, I'm guessing, zero evidence that these were drug boats. But it's also important to understand what's going on with Venezuela here. I mean, you had initially from Trump an effort to negotiate with Maduro because ultimately their goal is to they tried to, initially the goal was to see if they could peel Venezuela away from the relationship with China, with Russia, with Iran, because, Trump sees, the Western Hemisphere as America's property. I mean, this goes to the deeper kind of foreign policy approach Trump has, which is kind of, great powers get to do what they want. They get to rule their neighborhoods, their spheres of influence. This will be true of Russia. This will be true of China. And America, while still the biggest player on the block, the biggest, baddest guy on the block, gets to essentially run, a massively upsized version of the Monroe Doctrine, if your listeners remember that, where basically we get to determine who gets to rule and who gets to do what in the Western Hemisphere. And that is to say that China and Russia and other competitors, other adversaries, however you want to call them, shouldn't be mucking around in America's backyard. That's the view Trump takes. And initially their approach was to try to cut a deal with Maduro. But it does seem at some point over the past few months that the policy shifted, and there's reporting on this, and it confirms what I've heard as well, is that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's extremely ideologically opposed to Maduro, he comes from a family of Cuban immigrants. Venezuela has been a key ally of Cuba in the view of many in the kind of very hawkish Cuban community. Their view is that if you could knock out Venezuela, then Cuba would quickly fall. Cuba there's been one more thing we need to do to knock Cuba out, going back 70 years. This ridiculous embargo that we've had. So Trump is not crazy about the idea of regime change. Of course, he wants to be a pro-peace president. You can take that as seriously as you want, but it's clear that he's not interested in kind of long-term interventions. While a lot of people, including me, were surprised that he joined the strike on Iran with Israel a few months ago, he quickly ended that after a week. He does not want to be drawn into long wars. So the way that it appears he's been brought on board for regime changes in Venezuela is, he's been sold on this idea that the Maduro regime is a key part of this drug smuggling cartel, and they are essentially, waging war on the people of the United States by helping, smuggle in fentanyl, other drugs, cocaine. Now, of course, there are elements of the Cuban government, the Cuban military in particular, that clearly have a role in drug smuggling. This is true of a lot of regimes of this sort. But there's zero evidence that, that Nicolas Maduro is kind of the kingpin sitting on top of this drug gang. But that's how Trump, has chosen to see it, likely was convinced of this by Marco Rubio. And that's the way they've gotten Trump to support this policy.
Yeah. And it is one of those examples, I think, of how Trump is in many ways still a prisoner of American history, and falls into those same traps of intervention in Latin America, which then forces immigration as people flee dangerous situations, which, fits right into his playbook.
Right. No, it does. And I mean, let's also say, and notable that Machado, one of the opposition leaders, won the Nobel Prize recently, someone who was banned from running for president in Venezuela in 2024. She supported another candidate who is believed to have won, The evidence is that Maduro lost. So again, we shouldn't have any love for Maduro. I mean, that should go without saying. But there is a way to go about this that's not just and again, I'll refer to a story that came out a couple of weeks ago that Trump has authorized the CIA to kind of plan for covert action and eventually overt action in regime change. That's part of what kicked off this latest round. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm not someone who buys into the kind of anti-China. I don't think that competition and conflict with China needs to be the lens of our foreign policy. But I also think that looking for ways to talk with and negotiate with Maduro at the beginning of the Trump administration was smart. It's one of the few things that Trump did, or one of a number of things that Trump did that I was pleasantly surprised by. But it does seem he's been kind of pulled away from that approach by Rubio and other hawks in the administration and on the outside, in part because, again, there's a very, hawkish Cuban immigrant community in Florida, which is an important state electorally for Republicans. And that's where Marco Rubio is from. And my understanding is that was part of the argument that Rubio made, is that you're going to have trouble in Florida. Republicans will have trouble in Florida if you're seen as being too soft on Maduro. Now, I'm surprised that, Trump took that seriously, because Trump is the one who makes trouble. I mean, it's hard to see that, but that's apparently something that was convincing to Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like he is relatively easy to convince, if only temporarily, of things like this. And you mentioned there, Matt, though, that one of his driving ideas is to be this president of peace, but symbolically more than, he's not interested in the work of genuine peace building or the kind of investment that requires. And that kind of general disinterest in building genuine peace does seem to be playing out fairly predictably in Gaza as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you noted, he's not interested in doing the hard work. He just kind of wants to get in there and, knock heads together and then come out of the room claiming, okay, I got people to do what I want. And in Gaza, he was able to get a ceasefire. He was able to get the ceasefire in January as well, even though, Biden administration former officials have been, trying to claim credit for it, saying that Trump inherited his ceasefire. I mean, while the Biden administration, I think, did design the basic contours of the agreement, it would not have happened if I think it's almost certainly would not have happened if it had been an incoming Harris administration or another Biden administration. It was Trump who showed the willingness to really put the screws to Netanyahu. But unfortunately, he reverted to the Biden policy and let Bibi walk all over him when Bibi, violated the ceasefire in March and went back to war. But yeah, it does seem that he really did push Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire. Thank goodness. We'll see, whether it endures. There have been violations here and there by both sides, but mainly by Israel, which has continued to launch attacks. Hamas, in my understanding, has also kind of slow walked the release of bodies of hostages, even though they moved very quickly to release all of the last living hostages. There are bodies. And there's a debate whether they know where they all are, or whether they're just slow walking it for their other reasons. But anyway, it has mostly been holding. There is aid getting in, not nearly enough, in part because, Gaza has been turned into the moon, in part because some of the key aid, distribution organizations, particularly UNRWA, have been essentially banned. Not essentially, they have been banned by Israel. And UNRWA has an enormous infrastructure, and, not being able to use that infrastructure is a huge handicap for any aid delivery. But, Trump is claiming credit for getting that ceasefire, which I think he deserves. You can also criticize him. We should criticize him for allowing it to go on as long as it did. He should have held Netanyahu to his agreement back in March. He did not, unfortunately. And we've seen an interesting exchange over the past few days with a number of U.S. officials, including Vice President Vance and now apparently Marco Rubio, going to make sure the ceasefire holds. This is unfortunately common practice in the United States, where senior officials have to go over and manage Benjamin Netanyahu. It's called babysitting to keep
and Bibi's right flank as well. That's now
right. And given the enormous support the United States gives to Israel, it's very fair to question, like, why should we have to spend this much time and resources managing this small partner? Is this really worth it for us? But there were interesting comments made by Vance. There was this vote in the Knesset to approve annexation of the West Bank. Vance was very critical of that. And I think it was an important statement of policy that the United States does not support annexation and will not allow it to go forward. I think the use of the word allow was important because there are lots of things the U.S. allows Israel to do that we should not. But also, I think a lot of this is, the audience for this kind of stuff is Saudi Arabia, because, Trump really sees getting Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords to normalize, relations with Israel. It's kind of the crown jewel of his Middle East policy. And Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, has made clear he will not consider this in the absence of a Palestinian state, or at least a credible pathway toward a Palestinian state. And the term credible pathway to a Palestinian state can be defined so many different ways. Yeah. So that's the question. Will the price remain high, or will MBS be convinced to accept some BS kind of words that, maybe someday this will happen, we all hope it will happen, kind of thing that we've heard so often from U.S. officials.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, and when those officials are Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
So as you know, this is one of 8 wars that my administration has ended in just 8 months. We're averaging one a month. There is only one left, although I heard that Pakistan and Afghanistan have started up, but I'll get that solved very quickly.
I guess just on that theme of attempting, I suppose, to build peace and to implement a ceasefire, the war in Ukraine also continues. And again, it's so difficult to keep up with what's happening. But in just a week, Trump has gone from apparently a very volatile meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, encouraging him, probably that's not the right word, but asking him to just accept Russia's terms, to then turning around to sanctioning Russia's 2 biggest oil companies. Yeah. What is happening, Matt?
Well, it's, Trump was convinced, apparently believed his own rhetoric when he said that, negotiating peace between Ukraine and Russia would be very easy. He found out it's not.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, who would have thought? And he found out, and listen, when Trump is confronted with someone that he can't just bully, he kind of short circuits, so he can lean on Zelensky, he can lean on Ukraine. Ukraine is hugely dependent on the United States. So he was able to push, Zelensky to be willing to negotiate, which I don't think that was entirely bad. I think the way he went about it was kind of gross and ugly and unfortunate. But I do think there is some value in pushing Ukraine to be willing to negotiate with Russia, because it has clarified once again that Russia is the problem. It is not Ukraine. Ukraine would love to end this war. It's Vladimir Putin who has not really changed his goals, and his goals are to curtail Ukraine's independence, control its future, and prevent it from determining functioning as a real independent democracy. But Trump, he'll talk to Putin, and apparently he'll believe things Putin tells him. And then he'll become frustrated when Putin does other things. Putin is unwilling to play along with the script that Trump has created in his mind that allows Trump to kind of come out of the room with Putin and Zelensky and declare that he has once again, shown that he's the greatest negotiator and deal maker in the history of all humankind. So he gets mad and he kind of whipsaws back and forth and, does what we just saw. But also, let's remember that members of his own party have been pushing him to impose new sanctions on Russia. And he wanted to hold off. He kept on, hoping that Putin would prove more amenable. And apparently that he's finally convinced that he won't. So the question is, okay, what happens now? I mean, I think Putin has shown that Russia is able to withstand enormous sanctions. Their alliance with China, their alliance with other countries, the fact that a lot of other countries keep buying their oil and their energy, their natural gas. They've essentially sanctioned proof. It's not to say it doesn't hurt. It certainly does, but Putin's not feeling it. People around him aren't feeling it. So as far as they're concerned, they've sanction proofed their regime from this kind of pressure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think can probably be assured that Trump will change his mind or will be able to be convinced to change his mind.
You dangle something in front of him. All right, maybe we do another meeting, or be willing to consider this. You never know.
Yeah. I guess just on that, Matt, that's where I wanted to end, because there's been such a lot made here in Australia this last week about a meeting between our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But much of the coverage still seems to treat Trump like a regular president, like that you can actually rely on his word if he says something, if he promises something, that's taken as confirmation and taken as given. And it happens again and again. You know, it happens with Ukraine, it happens with Gaza, it happens continually. And the people who seem to, there are very few leaders who seem to actually understand Trump. I think Putin is one, without kind of falling into conspiracy. You know, Putin knows who he's dealing with.
Yeah.
Zelensky seems to as well. Emmanuel Macron in France seems to know, but not many others do. And it's not really a fair question, but how do you think other nations or other leaders should understand what Trump is doing and how he operates?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to use a line from Jackie Brown, Quentin Tarantino's third movie, in my view, his best movie, for Trump. And it goes like this: you can't trust Donald Trump, but you can trust Donald Trump to be Donald Trump. So just understanding what Donald Trump wants. He wants to glorify himself. He wants to be able to claim achievements. Even if those achievements are in his head, that is what it's about for Donald Trump. And as you noted, Zelensky, Macron, Donald Trump loves gifts. He loves people who kiss his butt. He loves people who tell him how great he is, who come up with new ideas for him to demonstrate once again how great he is. And again, I'm sorry to have to be telling you this as an American, that this is what the world has to deal with. This is not the kind of president I want. This is not the kind of president I want the world to have to deal with. But that is unfortunately what we have right now.
It is. This is the situation in which we find ourselves.
Yes.
Thank you for helping us navigate through, Matt. Again, I know how busy you are, and we just appreciate your time and your analysis and your generosity so much.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode. If you want to see more scrutiny of AUKUS, you can sign our petition calling on the federal government to establish a parliamentary inquiry into the deal. The link is in the show notes. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. You can reach us via our email address, which is podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Friday, the 24th of October, Australian time. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation and produced by Angus Blackman. We'll be back next week. I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.